welcome everybody to this session for the conference. Super excited that you guys have shown up for listening to me speak about alternative ways of doing reporting. The session title is Next Gen Reporting, Data-driven notifications for instant insights. And while on the conference page it's been listed as a data activator session, it's also that, but it's in general a session about how we can do data-driven notifications and notification-based reporting as an alternative to classic Power BI reporting style insights. Before we dive too much into it, just a couple of introductionary slides here from my side. My name is Jon or John. I'm a consultant with Inspari, a Danish-based consultancy, which is part of the Valentic group. I work as a Fabric and Power Platform consultant, so I work a lot in that space between those two platforms, and that's also partially the inspiration for this session. And I absolutely love that intersection. It's amazing that Fabric has given analysts so many new tools and brought analysts so much closer to the data platform work, and vice versa. I think the data platform will have a grand time being closer to the business side of things. In my spare time, if you're curious about that as well, I spend a lot of time riding bikes and playing board games with everybody I can convince to do so. But without further ado, the agenda for the next 45 minutes or so, depending on how swiftly we move through things. Gonna first just take a second to reflect on why is this topic even relevant, to try to motivate the basic question of the session. Then there are no less than 4 different live demos and solution walkthroughs. We'll have a look at subscriptions for Power BI. We'll have a look at metrics for Power BI. We'll have a look at Power Automate, and we'll have a look at Data Activator, which all represent 4 different approaches to notification-based reporting. We'll do a bit of a comparison between all these 4 solutions, pros, cons, what should you use in which scenario, and we'll do a little bit of a wrap up at the end. I'm not 100% sure how exactly it works with Q&A in the session. I suppose we'll take most of it at the end. Feel free to write them in the chat or something like that, and we'll make sure to cover it if there is time. Without further ado, I think let's jump into it. So the question that sort of prompted this session back a few months ago when I drafted the abstract for the conference here is that I, as a consultant, was faced with a, well, I would say to me, a new challenge when I was out at customers. And the challenge was that all of a sudden we were back in the old Excel hell-ish reporting scenario where, well, it was no longer hundreds of Excel reports that were present in the organization I was at. It was hundreds of Power BI reports. In general, you would think it's a good thing that there's a lot of Power BI reports and data is being shared and solutions are democratized and all of that, self-service, and yeah, it's great. It's not great if you cannot see the forest for all the trees, right? It's not great if the users are suddenly unsure which report they need to go for the most important insights. It's not great if they lose track of what solutions already exist and start building stuff that's already there. So that challenge, of course, should be solved somewhere else. You should always have a good look at the reporting landscape in your organization. And I'm by no means trying to say here that we should not build Power BI reports. We definitely should. I'm a huge proponent. But I believe that there is also a good reason to look at alternative reporting options, such as promoting insights through other channels. Be it notifications via Teams, be it through email, or if you're using other means of communication, post to Twitter if your company secrets are not so secret. And that's what kind of spurred this session to come to life. And I spent a good deal of time sort of trawling through what options do we have in Fabric. And those are the options that I'm gonna outline for you today. So hopefully you'll leave this session with a good idea of what are the options available to you and which ones can you apply in which situations. That is at least my goal for today. So the four topics that we're going to cover, from easiest to hardest and in the order that you see on the screen here. We're going to first have a look at subscriptions, both standard subscriptions and what's new in Fabric, the dynamic subscriptions for Power BI reports. We'll have a look at the metrics layer in Power BI, which is due for a revamp, as was announced at the community conference back in spring. So maybe what you'll learn today will have to be revised with new information in a short amount of time, but nonetheless, you should know what's already there. We'll have a look at Data Activator, obviously a huge part of the real-time intelligence experience in Fabric, and which opportunities does that provide for us. And then we'll also have a look at Power Automate, which sort of is the most complex of the solutions that I'll be talking about today. So first things first. From easiest to hardest, the easiest way we can start to think about notification-based reporting are the simple subscriptions that have existed in Power BI for a while already. Maybe this is new to some of you, but to many, this is probably a feature that you're already aware exists. What we can do, and I'll show you in a second how it works, is that we can set up a automated subscription for a Power BI report to be sent out to a number of recipients. We can subscribe not only ourselves, but also our colleagues to Power BI reports and define how frequently should they receive this report. They will receive a link to it, and you can also decide to pass them a PDF or a PowerPoint version of the contents as well. You can also, instead of emailing the content, you can actually also store those files on OneDrive or SharePoint if you wish to version a snapshot of your reports if you're not able to do that on the backend side of things. But you are not, with this solution, able to customize a lot of things. I think to just jump right into it, here's just a screenshot of the solution. I'll just jump into Fabric and I'll show you what it looks like. So if I jump into Fabric here, I have just a workspace here with a folder I use for this presentation. There's a bunch of stuff going on in here, right? We're not going to have a look at all of it, but what you should know is that I have just a super simple Power BI report that I'll be opening up in a second, which is using the taxi demo data set that maybe also some of you guys are familiar with. It's a demo data set that comes built into Fabric that you can query. So I have a bit of pipeline and warehousing set up, have a semantic model on top of it, and then I played around with just having Copilot auto-generate a report for me for the case of this demonstration. So it came up with something like this, and I'm not to judge Copilot in this case. I think it's an honest try at giving me a summary of my semantic model. I actually think it did pretty great. I would change some things myself, of course, but the focal point here was not necessarily the output of Copilot. It was, well, if I wanted to subscribe to this report, how would I go about doing that? And you'll see the button up here at the top ribbon, which is going to be available not only to, of course, the developers of this report, but also to end users of the report, right? You can click subscribe to report, and then here you'll see a list of your existing reports, your existing subscriptions rather. I have toggled all of these off in order to not be spammed all the time. But if I click new subscription, you'll see I have two options. We'll get back to the dynamic per recipient in a second. But the standard functionality here is very straightforward. I'll give the subscription a name so that I can find and turn it off later. I'll define my recipients. You can even put in 80 groups here. You can decide whether to attach the report. You'll set a scheduling interval, and you'll be able to also specify which message does this subscription come with when it's being sent. If there were multiple report pages, we could embed one or more of them here. We can decide to include a link, etc., etc., etc. That's the basic subscription, and we're not going to spend too much more time on that because I think that's a baseline that most of us can understand, and there's not too much magic going on here. But that's the most basic way we can think about this, right? It's we're gonna deliver an email to our end users with just a screenshot of the report and a link to the report, prompting them to say every Monday morning, go and check your numbers from last week, something like that. The next option we have, and you saw the bottom just a second before, right, is the dynamic subscriptions, which were introduced with Fabric last year and became generally available, I think, back in March. And they are the extended version of the subscriptions we just looked at. They are extended in the sense that they are context aware, they are model aware. We can feed dynamic subscriptions with tables from our semantic model in order to both map filters as well as recipients and say, well, okay, if I want to send a report to recipient A and there is supposed to be row level security on my model, I can make it so that my subscription will send a filtered screenshot to the end user along with the link so he can go in and check the report with the security implemented, right? We can also use this dynamic filtering for other things, such as dynamically altering the topic or the subject line in the email that we're going to send. We can dynamically alter the file format if one group of people needs one format and another needs another. And in general, just parameterize the subscription. Let's see how that works. So I'm just going to jump right straight back to Fabric here, click subscribe to report, new subscription, and this time dynamic per recipient. Now it's going to ask you to connect to a recipient data model. I'm going to pick the same model that the report was built on. And now you'll, excuse my super small resolution here, you'll be able to basically pick and choose data from your semantic model. In this case, I want to grab the user email and the states that they have access to in the row level security of my semantic model. This does take a second to load, but if we just give it 10 seconds, hopefully it shows up. We should see 5 rows of data here. And showing that we have access to certain states here. The email I'm logged in with right now is this admin account, which have access to, I guess this is Alabama as well as Pennsylvania. And hopefully what we'll see in a second when we send the subscription is that I will get a filtered snapshot of this data, given that we set up the subscription correctly. So if I jump further on to the email details here, I can again give this subscription a name, right? Fabric Global Online subscription. And then instead of manually defining the recipients, this is where we can jump in and get that from the data fields that we defined before. So I can grab this user email field as the recipient and it will loop through all of these records. I believe there is a cap currently of 500 recipients for dynamic subscriptions. So if you have more than 500 users, you'll need to figure out a way to set up multiple subscriptions and perhaps filter them so that you only get a maximum of 500 recipients per subscription. For the subject line, again, if I had had a field in my semantic model tied to the user email which defined a subject, I could have coded that up in the backend if I wanted to, right? I could have inputted that here. In this case, this could just be, subscription subject. Optional message. We'll put that. Then again, just like the normal report, we can define if we want to choose a page. But again, this is also possible to make dynamic. If we want to feed one audience with one page and another audience with another page, we could have mapped that in the backend. And finally, also the format of the attachment. If we want to attach one, we can select none. That is also possible to make dynamic. Let's try and continue here, because the last thing we need to do, not the last thing we need to schedule it to, but we need to add those filters that we want as well. So, I mean, we don't have to. I don't have to put a filter here. We can simply keep this part dynamic and say, well, I want to send it to all these recipients, and that's it. That's still a dynamic subscription, which is, instead of you having to define all the names as you would in a normal subscription, this is a way to dynamically grab all the recipients. And that might be enough. But if you want to parameterize it, if you want to filter this report, you can add a dynamic filter here and say, well, I want to map the state field from my report to the state field that we added in this subscription filtering. And now if I click next, I'll just have to say how often do we send this. I'll just pick something here. Know that you can do this either after a data refresh, which is awesome that that's an option, or you can choose daily, weekly, monthly. If you choose weekly, you'll have the option to do it, multiple times per week. So that is pretty nice. And for a month, you can choose also the specific days. So quite a lot of scheduling options. In this case, we'll just set something here, say save and close, and then we'll send a test to my email. We'll click send now. And this does take a minute or two to arrive. So I did cheat like it was a cooking show, right? You can see here that, well, you can tell Danish time, this is late at night, right? But earlier today during my work hours, I actually did a test of this. And you'll notice that I got a bunch of subscriptions here. That's because I sent all of the different user emails just to the same email here. But you'll see that they each have different, I know it's a little small here. Let's see if I can zoom a little. They all have different county names shown in the report, and that proves that that state filter that we showed actually goes through. So this user received New York, and I am not completely sure whether the states shown in the example here was Pennsylvania and Alabama. I have a feeling it might be. If the subscription goes through in a minute, we'll get another email that looks like this. The attached email, the PDF, will have the same result, right? Again, I can only see the filtered data. There's no New York data received for this recipient. And there is also, of course, a link for the user to open the report with the row level security implemented. So I think that's a really, really neat upgrade to the subscription feature in Power BI. Very much appreciated that that's now a feature. It takes a little bit more skill and knowledge to set up, right? It's no longer just the plot in a recipient, select a schedule. If you want dynamic recipients, you'll need to define that in your data model, a list of emails to be sent to, as well as any other parameters that you wish to apply. So a little more complex, a little more flexible. Now, if those were the first solutions, what do we have in Power BI that allows us to maybe go a little bit more into the data in our reports? Say, what if we want to follow the progress of specific KPIs in our reports? There are many options. We're not going to cover all of them here. Some of you might be thinking, oh, we can create data-driven alerts in dashboards. And yes, you can, but frankly, I've never really been a fan of that solution. Rather, I think you should give Power BI metrics, also known as scorecards, a shot. Also because I know that they are due for an upgrade. They are calling it the new metrics layer in Fabric, which was, as I mentioned in the very beginning, announced at the community conference back in the spring. So, I mean, chances are that there are news coming for the Stockholm conference in 2 weeks, right? They'll probably say that this is right around the corner. Anyway, the existing metrics layer allows us to create metrics that are based on visualizations in our Power BI report. They also allow more than that, but that's the interesting part for the purpose of notification-based reporting. And the great thing about these metrics is that they are really quite collaborative in nature. You can create metrics for yourself, but you can also create them on behalf of a team, let multiple people follow the progress of metrics, set them up to send notifications when certain data thresholds are met. All participating teams or team members on a metric can add check-ins and add qualitative descriptions on, why are the numbers looking like they do. Really, it's a question of taking the reporting that maybe sometimes lives inside of a Power BI report and put it somewhere else. And that can be a help if you're in a reporting landscape that is so complex that it's hard to fathom what's going on. So if you have some key metrics, some KPIs that you or a team needs to follow, metrics might be worth giving a shot for you. So again, this is just screenshots. Let's actually jump into the metrics and see what the experience looks like in Fabric and Power BI. So again, let's jump into this right here. This time going back to the workspace, I have created a scorecard object in my workspace. You'll just create that like any other item. You'll find scorecard right here. That's the one we are looking for. And when we go in here, the interface looks like this. You'll need to click edit up here in order to create or edit the existing metrics. And what we can do is, well, we can create new metrics here or link to an existing metric somewhere else if we want to, although that's a preview feature. But creating a new metric, we'll call this again Global Online Conference Metric. I'm the owner. That's just a matter of who owns this value. That can be multiple. And then as the value and target values here, I can, manually put a value here if I just want a manual KPI that I am updating manually. But what's the fun in that, right? Rather, we should instead connect to data. And one of the things that I've been having a good time doing is actually using metrics to connect to my Fabric Capacity Metrics app and use metrics to create notifications for when my Fabric capacity is running, is being used too much. So I can connect to that. And what happens is that I'll be able to point to a specific data point in my report that I want this metric to follow. And now if this loads, I of course need to pick a capacity. See if this loads. Otherwise, we can use the one I created before. I have almost no usage of this huge F64 trial capacity, right? So there is nothing really to measure here. But if I click on a visualization, I'll get the option to choose which one do I want to follow. In this case, the background percentage, but it could also be the interactive percentage, right? And then when it has loaded the latest value, 0.06%, I can connect to that measure value in my metric. And you can see that value is now replicated in my metric. I think that's really cool. And there's just a lot of people that don't know this feature even exists in Power BI. They are completely oblivious to the fact that we have metrics and scorecards, but they are so easy to set up. Now, for a target value, what if we also had a target value in our report? Then, of course, I could connect to that from the same report or even another report, right? I could find my target value from a report that's not even linked to this one. In this case, I don't necessarily have a good target value, but let's say that this was actually just 0.05. I should have put in another zero there, another zero, to say that, yes, we are now actually above our target. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I wanted to also show how it works when we set up rules for a metric. So I can set up a new rule here that says, well, if the value is greater than 100% of the target, change the status to at risk, for example. Put it like this and click save, and hopefully this updates. It says not started. Not very confident that, okay, now it updated, right? It just needed to load, and it says we're now at risk. Oh, I accidentally moved it in here. That was not on purpose. Now it lives in here, but that's fine. We can see that this target is now at risk. I keep moving it. I'm sorry about that. And what we can do now, if I was a member of this team, I could go into this metric and I could add a new check-in. I could say, when am I here? And I could say, well, we really used our capacity today. That's why we were at risk. It might also be that you are logging completely different data points, and that's totally fine, right? But the idea is that we can actually also choose to follow this metric. And as far as I know, you cannot do this on behalf of other people, unlike the subscriptions. Each person who wants to get these notifications will have to follow this metric. But what it will allow you to do is simply, again, gain email notifications when new check-ins happen, as well as when there are status changes. And that is what elevates this, of course, to the notification-based reporting paradigm as well, right? When we're able to take these insights and notifications and move them from the SaaS solution and into the place where our users are going to be anyway, Teams, Outlook, that kind of thing. I think that's pretty awesome. You can even cascade these, as you can see. You can create sub-metrics which aggregate into a total KPI. So you can create a whole reporting solution inside of metrics if that's what you want. And who knows what they have in store for that new metrics layer. I'm super excited to find out myself. I think actually this notification that we are getting right here is oh, that's for Teams. Okay, I was just thinking that maybe it was the metric that that came through. But we'll have a look at the questions at the end. So going back to the slides here, where were we? We need to go to the metrics here. Metrics, again, slightly more complex to set up than either of the subscription options, but you get more data-driven KPIs here, right? The subscriptions, you just send a general picture. That's not very helpful for the end user in terms of actually understanding what do I need to look at when I get that snapshot. It might prompt them to look at the report because they get a notification, they get an email, but they don't know what to look at. Metrics, they solve that problem by saying, not only do you get a notification, you get a notification because our capacity metrics are exceeding a threshold that we set. So I'm getting a notification Wednesday midday because all the users are logging on during their lunch break. They probably are not, but that might give me a warning, right, and prompt me to do something. And of course, that's just one example, right? I'm sure you can think of a situation in your own work life that where it would be nice to have a data-driven notification like that. So metrics might be a solution for that problem. Another way to go about these more sort of live events, and the reason I now make emphasis on live is that, well, these metrics, they are only going to be as live as your semantic model, right? You may have a direct query model, in which case the metrics will be quite live, but many models are import, right? And your metrics will frankly not update super frequently if that's the case. The premise for Data Activator is that we, if at least in some cases, have a way to get much more real-time insight into what's happening, and based on that real-time insight, trigger certain actions. So what we can do with Data Activator basically is that we can choose to listen in on two different things. We can either listen in on an event stream from the real-time intelligence experience. If we have a real-time event stream of data coming in, we can get real-time insights based on that. Or we can listen in on a Power BI visual. In that case, we are again slave of the semantic model and will only get notifications when the semantic model changes. Or rather, Data Activator will check the status of the visual once every hour. You cannot set the exact interval for when this will happen, but it will check once an hour. And you may have conditions that will trigger every hour, even if your model doesn't refresh. Not sure if that makes sense. I'll see if I can show an example, but know that there's a difference. Event streams, that's live notifications more or less with Data Activator. If you use Data Activator in Power BI, you're going to be limited to hourly notifications. Let's actually just have a look. That's easier than just talking about it. So I'm going to jump back into that demo report from before. Don't mind, again, the fact that this is not a nice report. Mind the fact that at the top of your report, if you are in a Fabric enabled workspace with this report, the set alert option up here prompts you to select a visual and create an alert based on that. So in this case, I can, for example, monitor the sum of trip duration seconds as we have it in this taxi overview, right? And I can set a condition that I want to check. So simply every time this changes, or every time this becomes greater than a certain value, then I want a certain action to happen. And from this menu right here, I can choose Teams message or email, and then I can choose where to save this. I'll save this in a reflex I already created. Let's try this, and let's just click create and see what happens. Because this is something that all end users, they'll be able to do, right? They'll be able to create these alerts on behalf of themselves, and they will receive this alert. Now, if I go in and open this Data Activator reflex, I will have more possibilities for customization that I did inside of the Power BI report. So now it's opened up the Data Activator interface. And in here, I can see that latest data point, which was checked 21:30. I guess that's UTC time. And this will be reviewed again an hour from this time point. So 22:30 will be the next time this value is checked. And we're going to check if the value has changed. And if that's the case, you'll see right here, there's actually way more possibilities here than were in the Power BI report. We can choose all kinds of crazy conditions here. You can really come up with some quite complex filtering and detection combinations for saying, I really only want a notification in these edge cases. You can set that up. And then as the act part of your reflex, you can again, yeah, we can customize this, the message that's supposed to be sent. We can both customize the recipients, but also make the headlines and messages dynamic based on the properties that are as part of this reflex. But we can actually also, if we're in this interface, choose to fire a fabric item action. So I can run a notebook or trigger a data pipeline when a reflex runs, or I can, let me just show you, if I choose my demo workspace, you can see here it's all my pipelines and notebooks. And I can actually also create custom actions, which is Power Automate actions to be triggered. But I'll return to that when we get to the Power Automate part of this presentation. So in here, you simply have the option to do all this. And I thought, um, just to show you guys a little more inside of the demo workspace, I have created an event stream as well, just to show you what slightly more live data looks like. So if I go into this event stream here, it's just using, again, Fabric demo data. The demo data here is bicycle, city bike rentals in London, you know, these small bikes that you can rent at these stations, right? At all times, this streaming data set says something about how many bikes are left in all the different stations. And I have a reflex here which this event stream is feeding into. And now let me just edit this for a second. You can see that you can add multiple destinations to these event streams if you want. So you can have multiple reflexes that listen to the same event stream. But the idea is that that once you have set this up, you will still need to go into the reflex and actually configure what happens based on the data, right? So if I just go in here and find, oh, I guess I didn't put it in the folder. The maybe it's in here. No, let me just close some of these. Bicycle reflex. I don't find that. I think I put it in here. I did not. Okay. Well, in any case, this feeds into a reflex and it does exactly the same thing as if we had queried the Power BI visual. You'll be able to set up the exact same things, select which data point are we looking at, what kind of data detection do we want to do, and what action do we want to perform. If I send a test alert here, we'll get a sample Teams message, I hope. I send it to, oh, I'm obviously not logged into Teams with this one. Let's see if it shows up here. This is my developer tenant being used, so it's not hooked up to the Teams that I'm logged into here. Aren't able to connect. Okay, let's just give it 1 second. Would just be fun to see the actual output of the data activator reflex. There we go. So you'll see here, Data Activator has sent me a Teams notification that the Power BI value has now changed from value X to Y. You'll get a link to the alert, and you'll get the values of the actual the actual status of that report right here. So again, just another way to move an insight out of a report and into a place that the user is going to check. When they've checked this notification, then they might go into the report and find all that contextual information, right? We cannot put all of the contextual information in here. That's not the point. The point is to let the user know it's okay that you don't open up your Power BI report 24 hours a day. You can keep it in the background and we'll tell you when you need to open it. That's the game changer here, right? We can tell people what's the most important number, and if you need the context, then you can go into the report. That's what works really well with Data Activator, and the fact that end users can set this up themselves because the interface, at least from within Power BI, is as simple as it is. I mean, this can be learned by any end user, I would argue. All right. So with that solution sort of outlined as an option, let's have a look as well at the fourth and final solution. So Power Automate represents sort of the most difficult solution here in a way, but there are two sides to Power Automate notifications that we should discuss. First, there is the fact that Power Automate can turbocharge the previous three features that we just looked at. There are Power Automate actions that can be triggered by and will act on subscriptions, on metrics, and on data activator flows, and enhance the capabilities of those. We'll have a look at it in a second, but the idea is, if you are not too familiar with Power Automate, it's a digital process automation tool. It works with triggers and actions. Triggers can be on a schedule. It can be when you manually start a flow, but it can also be event driven. An event in this case could be when a metric goal is met, when a target is exceeded, when a subscription is fired. I'm actually not sure that's a trigger, but it's a trigger if a data activator reflex is fired. And when that trigger happens, we can in Power Automate define a number of actions to happen. And those actions can again, well, they can span the options we just talked about. We can update metrics or send exported PDFs filtered with row level security of our reports, essentially simulating the subscription feature, but we can enhance all of this with additional logic. Basically, we can call any API from Power Automate. We can interface all of our usual Microsoft products as well as other cloud solutions and basically build a custom flow chart of what should happen when a data-driven alert is triggered, for example, in Data Activator. And that's super powerful. I did a flow the other week for a client in which they wanted their notifications to be sent by text message to their phones and not on Teams. And that was because they had some external providers who also needed these notifications, but they weren't a part of their organization. Well, in Power Automate, we could use a Power Automate action to send SMS text messages to end users. We couldn't do that natively with metrics or with Data Activator. That needed Power Automate. So integrating Power Automate with the other notification insights tools is one possibility. The other is we can actually use Power Automate to simply interface our Fabric, Warehouse, and Lakehouse SQL endpoints or our semantic models directly. So we can simply connect to the SQL endpoint and say, well, on a schedule every hour, check the status of this table or this group of data. And if the values exceed a certain threshold, do this and that. Or we can run a DAX query against our semantic model saying, well, create a table of all the products which exceed a certain threshold and send that formatted as an HTML table by Teams to this group of users. And start this approval flow for these other users who should make a conscious decision about these values which has exceeded that threshold. Really, I think the key word here is imagination is the only boundary when we're working with Power Automate. Let's just take a quick look at how this looks. These are just, again, screenshots from the solution. So if let's start by just going into our metric from earlier. And you'll notice that right at the top, there is a button called Create a Flow. If I click this button, it'll open up Power Automate. You'll see that button everywhere, by the way, in Microsoft. You'll see it in SharePoint. You'll see it in Data Activator as well. Well, frankly, in here, custom actions, create. If you click create a flow in Power Automate, if I filled out something here, it would do the same thing. But once you're in Data Activator, there's a great documentation page, by the way, which you should have a look at that outlines all the different triggers and actions that there are. But the Automate interface here actually provides quite a lot of inspiration. And you should do yourself the favor of simply going in here and see some of the templates that exist in here. So just to give you an example, these are the metric triggers which exist. So we can trigger an automate flow to run automatically when a new owner is assigned to a metric, when the status changes from, for example, normal to at risk, something like that, when somebody checks in on a metric. All of those are metric-based triggers that we can use, and then we can perform actions. Some of the template examples they have down here of all kinds of, these are not just tied to metrics, but we can send a message to Teams, of course. We can create objects in SharePoint lists when these triggers run. We can even refresh Power BI data sets. We can actually update Power BI data sets with new data. We can add rows to a data set. We can use SQL actions to send data to the Fabric data warehouse. We can save things to local system folders if we're connected with a gateway to that. There's all kinds of crazy stuff we can do. The way it looks when you build this is really quite straightforward. Let me see if I have a good example here. Let this load. I really should have preloaded this one, but do I have a better one? Let's have a look at this one. So this one uses the trigger when a data activator trigger fires. This will be automatically created when you create the flow from inside of data activator. So that's the trigger. We have a simple action here of sending a Teams message. And your flow doesn't have to be more complex than this. This could be all there is to it. If you don't need more complex logic, then it can be as simple as this to work with Power Automate. You can also go sort of the extra mile, and let me just see if I have that one here. If you wanted to, for example, query your semantic models directly from Power Automate, it becomes a little more complex. I'll urge you to look up tutorials about how to do this in detail. The trigger is super simple in this case. I'm running this just when a button is clicked, but again, I could use any event-driven trigger here. And then the key action here is run a query against the data set. So I'm using an action to simply, with low code here, decide which data set am I hitting. And then I'm just using my Power BI DAX competencies to write a DAX code here to say, well, give me a table of all the products which have more than 10 million in sales. Output that as a table. Then there is a little bit of complexity here, and we need to pass the JSON result that comes from this. I'm filtering it to say, really, I only wanted the ones that were more than 15 million. Then we remap only the columns that we need from the table, create an HTML table out of that, and then we send it as an email as well as a Teams chat. Can I trigger this? Maybe. See if we get a result. This will send just a message in my Teams chat here. And this is from the last time I tested this. I should have probably set that threshold a little higher than 50 million, but basically I now send myself a table of values that I need to be aware of, right? Oh, there we go. A new message was received. So you can see it works and everything. I also got it by email, just to show you that that worked as well. And that's how you can work with Power Automate to sort of do more complex things. If there's something you want to do with those data-driven notifications and you can't do it with metrics and data activator, you can do it with Power Automate. That's almost always going to be true. We're getting close to the end here, so I just want to wrap it up by going to a little bit of pros and cons wrap up here. I think hopefully I mentioned most of these along the way, but just to summarize, all of these have their use cases. Subscriptions are great because they're really easy and really fast to create. And if you just want to prompt people to open a Power BI report on a schedule, they're awesome. And with the dynamic subscriptions, we even get the possibility of employing security on this, as well as just parameterized subscriptions, which can be used for a number of things, right? Metrics, great if we want to take that extra dive into specific KPIs in reports and even match them against target values from the same report or from other reports. Great for team collaboration because you have this check-in functionality. Data Activator, the possibility of being slightly more live than the metrics. That's really great, but it's also very comprehensive in its trigger setup. So while it's still pretty easy, you can make complex logic in your conditions to filter what is being sent out. And that's really important point. You don't want to fall in the opposite sort of trap here of sending people too many notifications either. You want to do it only when it matters, right? Then finally, Power Automate, really versatile, very customizable, works standalone or on top of the other tools. Use it for that extra sort of integration. The cons, on the other hand, from left to right, the subscriptions are just a link to the report. There's not much more to it. Um, we cannot really customize too much about what is the content and how the user should take action on these things. Also, a good point is that the dynamic subscriptions actually require a Fabric capacity, while the regular subscriptions are available just with Power BI licensing. For metrics goes as well, that currently they are available in just a normal Power BI license, which is great. But on the other hand, they are not very customizable in terms of their notification content, etc. Very curious to see what's happening with the new metrics layer that's coming out soon. Data Activator obviously requires Fabric. You can only do that on reports in Fabric-enabled workspaces. The Power BI triggers, which are usable by the end users, have that limitation that they are only refreshed once an hour. And again, we only have some built-in flexibility in terms of notifications. We can pass parameters and stuff, but we don't have super high flexibility in Data Activator itself. But we can, of course, extend it with Automate. Then there's Power Automate. I didn't touch on the licensing of this because it is rather complex. It depends fully on which triggers and actions that you're using. If you're simply going to use Power BI actions, Teams actions, SharePoint actions, Automate just requires a basic Office license. If you want Automate to listen in on SQL servers or write to SQL servers, if you wanted to interface custom APIs and the like, you'll need premium Automate licenses for all interacting users. And then, of course, there's the con in Power Automate of it being relatively complex when you get into the scenarios that can't be handled by Activator and metrics alone. I'd say that you're probably better off sticking to these three tools if possible and venturing into Power Automate when necessary. So just the super quick rundown, when should you choose what? Use subscriptions if you just need a scheduled snapshot of a report and if you only have Power BI. Use metrics for those team collaboration scenarios in Power BI. Use Data Activator if you have Fabric. It basically can do more or less everything metrics can without the check-in functionality. And then Power Automate for anything more complex than what the other three can handle. And I'm really happy that you came by to hear this session. I stayed up until midnight, at least for the sake of you guys, and I found it worth my time. So thank you for stopping by. If you found this topic interesting or want to bounce different use cases regarding this with me, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. You can also see the other speaker sessions that I have available. If you also want me to come speak at some other place, I'll happily do so. And if you're curious about the presentation material here, it's not yet uploaded, but I'll get around to that hopefully tomorrow in case you want the slides for reference or anything.